Thank you, Mr. Blunt. Mr. Blunt, Colonial is one of hundreds of victims of ransomware attacks against our nation's critical infrastructure of this year. Would you think, and would you agree with the statement that the federal government should be doing more to help companies like yours prevent cyber attacks?
Thank you for that question, Mr. Chairman. First, I'd like to state that as a private entity, we know we have a responsibility as well, right? We're accountable for our defenses in our reaction to attacks like this. But I think if we look at the number of incidents that are taking place today throughout the world, let alone here in America, it's private industry alone can't do everything, can't solve the problem totally by themselves. So it's the partnership between private and government is very important to fight this ongoing slaught of cyber attacks around the world.
CISA is the main federal domestic cybersecurity agency, and it hosts the Pipeline Sector Coordinating Council to help bring together the private sector and government in that partnership, as you mentioned, to identify and address security issues. Do you know that if Colonial ever participated in these meetings or any other exercise or events that were hosted by CISA?
Thank you for that question, Mr. Chairman. I know that CISA is a good organization, and I know that we maintain a lot of communication and contact with CISA and have historically between our CIO and representatives from CISA. Actually, I was somewhat disappointed when I heard that they felt like if we hadn't gone in and contacted them the first day with the FBI, that we would not have contacted them separately. If you go back and look at the record and look at who we contacted throughout the event, we talked to every entity that could possibly help us get through the condition that we found ourselves in that day.
Do you know if you've participated in any of those meetings?
Yes, Senator. We participate in every governmental opportunity that we have to do tabletop exercises, security screens, and things like that.
So you mentioned you didn't contact CISA directly. So why did Colonial Pipeline decide to forego contacting or notifying CISA directly? What was the rationale for that?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We contacted the FBI almost immediately that morning once we determined that we were under attack. In that conversation with the FBI that morning, they frankly said, we want to get on a phone call later today. We're going to bring CISA into the conversation. And so at that point, we already knew the contact would be made there. We had a lot of governmental entities to respond to that day and call directly, and that was the most efficient means. We knew they would be in that meeting, and they were indeed in that meeting right after noon the day of the 7th.
Well, as you mentioned in your opening comments, and you've reiterated here in answers to these questions, you've been working closely with the FBI, and I know you allowed Mandiant, the private security firm, which you also referenced in your opening, to share information with CISA, and that is happening now. But given those actions, I would suspect that you agree that you have a responsibility to protect other potential victims based on what you have learned. To what extent do you believe that responsibility extends?
Thank you for that question, Mr. Chairman. We've been very transparent from the start. If you looked at who we contacted that day, we started with the FBI. Obviously, they included in the follow-up conversation. And then we started marching through all the ones that we normally would report to, whether it's the FERC, PHMSA, DOE, et cetera, et cetera. And what we found during that day was that we were allowed the conduit through DOE to talk to all these organizations on an ongoing basis, but through one central briefing. So we found that the ability to have that conduit to work on the supply side of the equation and on the restoration side of the equation with any number of governmental entities was extremely helpful to us. And then, of course, on the investigative side, we had the FBI and CISA working on that. So for anybody that comes under an attack like this, what you can't recreate is time and space and the ability to respond. And so the ability to have the conduit both on the investigative side as well as on the restoration and on the supply side was extremely helpful to Colonial Pipeline and our employees. It was an all hands on deck situation that morning and throughout the event.
And prior to the attack, I assume, I know you're not a technical expert, but it would have been helpful for you to get information about other potential attacks or other companies that may have been attacked with similar types of cyber incidents?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. For example, we gave a lot of indications of compromise to the FBI and CISA during the days of the event. And I think what we saw is, as an industry is immediately that material was dispersed out. And in the case of the IP addresses, I believe CISA actually posted those. And that was a means for us, once again, to efficiently communicate to our industry partners what was going on. And in addition to that, we go back to the first day when we were contacting people, we made initial contact with some of our industry trade groups to tell them what we could possibly tell them at that point in time. So we've been, once again, very open and transparent, hoping that everybody could not only be aware of the situation, but think about what they could do to help prevent that from occurring in their own company.
Well, that's all very encouraging to hear. And just for the record, I'm working on legislation right now to make sure that information is indeed being shared with CISA to get a better understanding of what's happening in ransomware, not just with your company, but across the board. Reporting indicates, and you've affirmed today, that you made the decision to pay the ransom of $4.4 million. We're certainly happy to see that a portion of that's being recovered by the Department of Justice now. My question to you, though, is prior to making the decision to pay the ransom, had you consulted with anyone in the federal government on whether that would be an appropriate response?
Thank you for that question, Mr. Chairman. It was our understanding that the decision was solely ours as a private company to make the decision about whether to pay or not to pay. And considering the consequences of potentially not bringing the pipeline back on as quickly as I possibly could, I chose the option to make the ransom payment in order to get all the tools necessary and the optionality of those tools to bring the pipeline on as quick as we possibly could, safely as well as securely.
Well, after you paid the ransom and received the key to unlock your systems, did that actually fix all of the problems? Where are you today, and how long do you think it'll take for you to be 100%?
That's a great question, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for asking it. I think what a lot of people don't realize about cyber attacks and the repercussions of a cyber attack is it takes months and months and months, and in some cases what we've heard from other companies that have been impacted, years to restore your systems. Our focus that first week was to restore the critical systems that we needed on the IT side in order to safely and securely bring our pipeline system back up. So that's what we focused on. You know, an example would be this week we're bringing back online 7 finance systems that we haven't had since the morning of May 7th. So again, the remediation is ongoing. And again, that's why you bring someone like Amanda in immediately, one, to help investigate the situation, but also to help restore what you've lost throughout the process. The keys are helpful, and we have used the keys, so they have been advantageous to us, but they're not perfect.
And I think that's important to remember. You get the keys, but you still have a problem for many months and a lot of work to do.
Yes, sir. That's
really illustrates the seriousness of what we're dealing with. Thank you for your answers. Ranking Member Portman, you were recognized for your questions.